Chapter 5, Old Age is Worth the Long Wait. Definitely. It's an excellent time. It's why your mother told you look both ways before crossing the street and to chew your food 30 times before swallowing. It's why when you drove drunk, you did so very cautiously. The beauty of getting old is that I am no longer trying to find myself. I am here. This is me, forlorn mug and all. There is history written all over me, and yet there is a secret child within. I don't dye my hair, don't use bronzer. I apologize for farting. I don't pretend it was someone else. I don't read inspirational books, thank you. My life is good enough. I no longer feel bad about being one of the few English majors who never finished reading Moby Dick about old cranky pants with the wooden leg, obsessed by the albino fish. I can forget about becoming multilingual and just stick with this one. A darn good language that has served me well. C'est la vie, as we say. The burden of my pretensions lightens. Once I wanted to be a playwright and wrote a play. It was performed and it was dreadful and people were polite about it, but the ambition passed like any other headache. I put politics behind me because I realize I have nothing to say that others haven't said better. I used to spend an hour over the morning paper. I don't anymore. Newspapers are dismal places, full of government stuff and political opinion and lifestyle nonsense and, of course, crime. But they never get to the heart of the story. What made that nice young man conspire with friends to kill his parents? And you read the paper, and aside from the weather, you get no sense whatsoever of what it was like to be alive in New York or Minneapolis yesterday. Reporters are out to impress you with their hard-earned savvy, but nowhere is there a hint that people were happy or amused by the life around them. You read the paper, and you feel like leaving town. H.L. Mencken said, "A newspaper is a device for making the ignorant more ignorant and the crazy crazier." I glance at it so I can see what I don't need to know more about. There are young people among us who argue that the country is systemically oppressive and corrupt and there's no such thing as commonality, and comedy is a tool of oppression, but by the time they take over the country and institute righteousness, I'll be long gone. Long gone, Levon. So there's no point in arguing with them, and meanwhile I can sit out on the terrace and look at the trees and tall grass in planters and listen to the mockingbird parents screech at me, warning me not to grab their fledglings who sit in the nest, beaks wide open, squeaking for food, just like our own daughter years ago. And I feel for them and stay at my end of the terrace and don't look their way. I want them to know that I eat no birds smaller than full-grown chickens, but they're right not to trust me. They know a carnivore when they see one. I once gave my love an Italian cookbook for her birthday, and she opened it and found recipes for leg of kid, eel, pork liver, braised snout, sweet and sour snout, and was so disgusted we entered into a vegan stretch for a month and a half. My fault. And then she saw how I was admiring her shoulder and upper arm. And it made her uneasy, and she bought a half-pound of ground beef. I'm not a hunter, I'm a writer, more interested in tillage than pillage. I'm a pacifist, an observer in a greedy and violent world. Classic, romantic, baroque, whether you sleep or are woke, remember this, Jack, there's no turning back from the fact that we live in a joke. 80 is not the end of the world, but I can see it from here, so I don't have long-range goals. There's just she and I, management and assistant. And the goals are survival and some degree of happiness. All the rest, synergy, networking, branding, having an impact, we're over that. Now it's all about health and marble retention. Self-improvement is a lost cause. I once considered cosmetic surgery, a muscle implant around my mouth to enable me to grin. Once you start corrective surgery, you likely notice other flaws that require correction, and a year later, your belly button is in your armpit and your butt comes out lopsided, so you have to wear orthopedic pants. Better to accept myself as is. So I do. Back in my teens, my friends and I liked doing unkind impressions of geezerishness, the trembling hand, the shaky treble stammering voice, the long pause for the missing word, the loss of balance and the sideways lurch, and now I'm at the age I used to satirize, and now maybe I am comical too, but that's been my line of work for years, and why change now? I've gone out shopping for pants and come home with a dozen pens and a pad of paper. I have now and then roamed around the apartment searching for my glasses while my glasses were parked on top of my head. Why not hang your glasses on a chain around your neck, she says. Because I am not a reference librarian named Evelyn, that's why not. Once we got up in the night to see a lunar eclipse and I put on a pair of sunglasses and she laughed like crazy. I once arose at 2 a.m. to use the bathroom and I urinated on my left foot, which did not escape her notice. Sometimes I walk into a room feeling gassy and tighten my anal embouchure to hold it in, which only produces more articulated farts, a whole string of them that sounds like, quote, if wishes were horses, then beggars would ride and the world would be drowned in a sea of pride. And she smells natural gas, very natural, which makes her collapse in hysteria. I sit down and emit a sound like a walrus clearing its throat, and she shrieks with laughter. It's a privilege to amuse her. Note, never marry someone who lacks a good sense of humor. She will need it, especially if the marriage lasts and she winds up being married to an old man. And if it won't last, why go to all the trouble? Just marry a desperately lonely man of 85 who has a pile of money and a bum ticker. As for men, don't marry a woman unless she's crazy about you. She'll likely have other eccentricities as well, but you can put up with those if she truly adores you. So be adorable. In other words, look before you leap. This comes from a man who jumped in the dark and landed on rocks. Sharp rocks, twice. Nobody ever said to me 80 is the new 70, because it's not. It's the home stretch. Most of the people living on Earth when you were a child are now dead. That world is gone. You're walking into the dim, vine-covered arcade with soupy organ music playing that maybe leads to eternal bliss or maybe a vast cloud of happy gas molecules. There are no U-turns allowed, a voice says. Please keep moving. Middle-aged boomers are pushing us and Gen X is pressing them. The poets told us to gather rosebuds while we may, that the flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying, and it's all true. But why in heaven's name is this happening to me? And then we discover that the uncertainty of tomorrow makes today rather beautiful. Stunning, in fact. Your feet touch the floor. A faint light shines through the blinds. The one you love sleeps next to you. You make coffee. The exotic smell of distant equatorial regions awakens thoughts of newspaper days, cafes in Copenhagen, and hearing those sweet vowels. O and A and A. Al's breakfast nook in Dinkytown, hearing the names Sartre and Camus and Kierkegaard. Mickey's diner among the hungover drunks. Early morning on the porch of the cabin at Cross Lake with Corinne, wondering if she wanted to be my girlfriend. I have no sense of morbidity anymore. I thought about death enough when I was young. I had friends, Leeds and Roger and Barry, who died before they turned 21. A drowning in 2 car crashes. I got a whole life and they got only a slice, and not the best one. Back then, death was a terrible tragedy, and at age 80, it feels like a definite trend among people I know. Mary, Margaret, Peter, Butch, Howard, Bob, Franz, Charlie, but I am alive today, and that is an outstanding fact, so make the most of it. When cousin Roger drowned at 17, trying to impress his girlfriend Susan, mother sent me to swimming lessons at the Y, but the instructor was a terrible bully. So I went to the library instead, a wise choice, and I grew up to earn my way as a writer rather than as a professional swimmer. Imagination. I read books and imagined writing one. I saw the soprano Ellie Den in a lead role in Don Giovanni at the Met, so commanding and fabulous on stage, and then was stunned to realize she's from my hometown, Anoka, an old railroad town on the Mississippi. I walked across the plaza and past the fountain in a state of wonderment. How do you learn to be Donna Elvira in Anoka, Minnesota? She managed her way there and got a couple breaks, and there she was. I wake up early and think, stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers of the cross. Help me put my feet back on the ground, and I do appreciate your being round. And I tiptoe out to the kitchen. Maybe I do some stretches while I'm waiting for coffee, but I avoid exercise. I have an aversion dating back to gym class in high school, having to do chin-ups and the running dive over the horse and forward roll. A ritual humiliation for a tall, awkward person, so no gym for me. I take my meds, open the window, inhale the day, pour myself a cup. If I have a thought in my head, I scratch it on a pad of paper or tap it out on the screen, and if it wants to be a paragraph or a page, I let it go free. Some work in the morning may neatly be done that all the day after is never begun. Work is crucial. The work comes first. When the Romans gave up farming for gluttony, they got so rotund their armor was too small, and the Vikings poked a spear in them and let the gas out. Pfft, and it was goodbye, Ovid, and hello, Ole. I don't wish to go up in a cloud of gas, so I sit and work. I'm well aware that an AI bot is available, which if I gave it a prompt could manufacture a passable passage about being 80 and feeling lucky and being in love, and someday my vocation may go the way of clog dancing, canning, quilting, and cabinetry. But I go on writing, not knowing what else to do. An hour passes, 2, 3, I hardly notice, and then Ginny walks in and becomes my laptop. The pandemic gave us a cloistered life, which is a good test of marriage, and the years of isolation made me appreciate her even more, her knack for finding things, her comic instinct, the raised eyebrow, the double take. What did you say? Her exquisite timing. 30 years this funny woman has stuck by me. She whose eccentricities I am fond of, the bedtime routine of opening a window, running an electric fan, working a crossword puzzle, tuning in the BBC on headphones, all of which is necessary to induce sleep. She dozes off to news of fishing fleets on the North Sea and a campaign to preserve Shetland dialect. She is the designated worrier with dozens of us on her worry list, and why not include fishermen and Shetlanders? She is an inveterate hugger, whereas I am a shoulder patter. I haven't mastered the choreography of hugging. It feels grabby to me, possessive, like tackling. My father approached her on first meeting. His hand reached for hers, and she rose up, and to his wonderment and alarm, embraced him. My mother was delighted, after years of solemn brethrenliness, to be squeezed. In the years since, at family funerals, the weddings of nieces, some evangelicals approach cautiously, wondering, will it happen again? And it does. She doesn't hug the plumber or the electrician. Ditto the doorman and delivery boys. There is a protocol. She is a straightener and neatener of things. I spill, she sponges, she walks into a room, and if there is a little scrap of paper somewhere on the floor, a fragment the size of a postage stamp, she zooms toward it. Barefoot, she feels grit on a wood floor and goes for the vacuum. Once she looked at me and said, your hair is trying to do something it really shouldn't try to do, and that's about as harsh as she gets. I am an apologizer and she's a forgiver. Oh, that is so old, she says when I launch into remorse. She walks off her troubles in Central Park, 6 or 7 miles worth, part of which she runs, and she comes back exuberant with an account of people blowing big soap bubbles that landed gently on the reservoir and floated away. The Korean wedding by the lake, and the man with Art Deco hair talking to his dog. Girl, fix your attitude. And the excitement of the sea lions just before feeding time, and the conversation she overheard of a couple discussing whether to break up or get back together. It was hard to tell which. A crowd of people standing in a grove of elms, many with cameras with long lenses, looking up at Flacco the owl who escaped from the zoo, perched in a high crotch, a man in the meadow playing the Bach G minor unaccompanied sonata. She is an uneasy flyer and not fond of trains, but she loves to drive and shout directions at other drivers. Get your fat ass over in your own lane, mister. She beats me at Scrabble, but is gracious about it. She creates salads that make me salacious. She rations my bacon cheeseburgers. She tells me if I look bedraggled. She is strict about squalor. She holds up a pair of black underwear she found in the couch cushions. It is a large pair with a slit in front. I weigh 220 pounds. She weighs half of that. Whose is this? She asks rhetorically. She believes that disorder, if tolerated, leads quickly to chaos. Allow a magazine to sit on the floor by the toilet, and soon you've got dirty clothes on the dining room table, old bed springs and tall weeds in the front yard, and an old rusted-out Chevy up on blocks in the driveway. And the nice neighbors are leaving, replaced by ruffians. She is on guard for slippage. Meanwhile, she recycles paper, plastic, tin cans, everything except me. She needs me. She asks me to embrace her and also to scratch her upper back. She misses my presence in bed. She comes from a family of talkers, and my people were not, and sometimes were like the Bob and Ray Slow Talkers of America sketch, in which Bob spoke very deliberately so as to make each word perfectly clear. And Ray kept trying to finish Bob's sentences and finally blew up and wanted to strangle him. But she has come to appreciate quiet evenings, lying on a daybed, reading, me 10 feet away, writing at a table, a symbiotic marriage. Her battle against clutter and chaos is a noble one. I once knew a couple men, both writers, whose lives jumped the tracks and fell into chaos, and who became a shadow of themselves despite efforts to rescue them, spiraling down to the despair of their few remaining friends. Drug addiction was involved, depression perhaps, various bad choices of companions, and one drank himself to death in a faraway city, and the other recovered somewhat, but permanently saddened and not the bright talent he once was. I also knew 2 men who lived lives of strict simplicity, austere, obstentious, militant in their focus on vocation, and faced with a choice between chaos and austerity. Austerity looks awfully good. It does, however, require a vocation. Chaos, a life driven by impulse, floating on the waves of the moment, is ever threatening to take us over the edge, and it must be resisted, beginning with daily clutter and unrequited friendships and unrewarding habits such as TV. Entertainment that doesn't entertain but only distracts. I felt a great freedom when I banished it from my life. And then alcohol. The test of abstinence is if you lose something and never miss it, you've gained. Abstention is worth experimenting with. Close this book and put it on a high shelf, and if you aren't curious about what follows, probably you're as cheerful as you can be. Chapter 6, Old Man Thoughts. I'm an old writer, got the sedentary blues. I need to take a walk as soon as I find my shoes. I got a good woman and she gave me a talk. She said, you're going to need a walker if you don't get out and walk. I know she's right, but what if I fall? You go down hard when you're 6 feet tall. I'll be lying there dazed, my brain a mess, and I'll never finish writing about cheerfulness. My grandpa, William Denham, was a cranky old Scotsman, but in a shoebox of old pictures, I came upon one of William weeding a strawberry bed and looking up at the camera and grinning. I don't recall him grinning ever, but here he was in Annabel Wright's garden, his wife, Marion, having died a few years before, and now William is courting the woman who is taking his picture, the lady he aims to marry. That is romance on Grandpa's face, carnal curiosity, call it what you will. He is looking for permission to approach the photographer and take her in his arms. The man fathered 13 children. He can't be accused of lack of enthusiasm. There is brightness in his eyes, and I see him more clearly now, kneeling by the strawberries, the man who did not stop at 9, but fathered Grace, number 10, and opened the door to my existence. He died at 73. I am now 7 years older than my own grandpa. I hold on to the railing while descending the stairs, lest I descend 10 of them suddenly all at once. I have age wrinkles on my inner upper arms. I don't read scary news stories such as, quote, interrupted sleep may lead to dementia, end of quote. I am astonished, having used outhouses as a boy, to walk into a men's lavatory and pee in a urinal and step back and it automatically flushes. The outhouse was pre-modern, and having used one, postmodernism is startling to me. I remember the 6-digit phone number, the party line, the wooden box on the wall with the little crank and speaking tube and earpiece hanging on a cord. And so the cell phone is amazing. The Times app, the map you can search for directions to the nearest stationery store. Meanwhile, I watch for curbs as one would watch for rattlesnakes. I have vision problems, poor hearing. I go to dinner at our friend's house and realize I've forgotten my hearing aids, and so the conversation may as well be in Urdu. And I try to produce appropriate facial expressions, keen interest, mild amusement, righteous disapproval, for the next 3 hours. And now I've read an article about hearing loss being connected somehow to Alzheimer's, so there's that to think about. Yes, there's a dark side to 80. I hang out with people my age, and the conversation often turns toward hip replacements. And unless you drop a china platter on the floor or the dog vomits up a meatball, you will hear about the relative virginity of French versus Italian olive oils. And of course, there's loneliness and guilt, a sense of meaninglessness. You wonder, why am I here? What did I come in the kitchen looking for? Why am I holding a spatula? But the moment passes thanks to memory loss. I felt my age last fall when I forgot my billfold in the back seat of a taxi and chased it for 4 blocks a month after my open heart surgery. I knew I'd forgotten it the moment the cab pulled away, a red billfold chosen for its unforgettableness, and I ran out of horror at the thought of having to tell my wife and thereby raise the ominous thought of dementia. Also the thought of having to replace the credit cards and call up Medicare, and so I galloped after him, though it was not a gallop so much as an accelerated stagger. But thanks to a traffic jam, I caught him and retrieved the billfold. I felt stiff the next day, but it was worth it. Forgetting my billfold is on my prohibited list, along with falling, feeling dizzy, following a woman I've mistaken for my wife, and failing the doctor's memory test. So far, so good. The moral of the story, aging, though likely to be fatal, need not be dull. Meanwhile, I am okay with being ignorant of celebrities whom everyone knows, like Victor Wembanyama or Giannis Antetokounmpo. I don't know what crop tops are and don't care. A young relative holds up his phone and plays me his favorite song, and I hear incoherent noise as he stands, stunned by genius. One less thing to occupy my time now that I have so much less of it. I used to be a Vikings fan, but then I read that fans of losing football teams experience a 20% drop in testosterone. which is cruel to contemplate. A game ends in defeat and your wife hugs you to comfort you and you think, oh no, let's not go down this road again. So I gave up football. My wife is grateful. But these are trifles. I have a good life. Reaching 80 is worth the trouble. I now accept that colorless hetero males have become fringe figures in American life and will likely be phased out in a few years. Replaced by manufactured semen, and better babies will come down the chute. No allergies, syndromes, or complexes as the gender balance is adjusted to 90 to 10. Women to men, making for a peaceful and rational world with a few million CHMs kept around for heavy lifting, honor guards, garbage collection, and the disposal of dead rodents. Personally, I feel it is liberating to become peripheral and irrelevant. You are freed from the expectations of others, free to simplify your life, delete the stuff that makes no sense. I scratched college basketball, Florida vacations, expensive loud restaurants, science fiction, pocket billiards, the Book of Revelation, and broadcast journalism, and thus life is tidied up. As a young man, I practiced irony and saw pretense and arrogance wherever I looked. And now I see splendor and bravery and genius and kindness as the real story and have faith that the story will keep going. I am kind to strangers. I hold the door open for people except young women who might be offended and tell me to go to hell. Go wrong. My friend Harry Reid, who grew up dirt poor and fought his father to protect his mother and hitchhiked 40 miles to go to high school and wound up marshaling the Affordable Care Act through the U.S. Senate. I talked to him a couple months before he died, and he was full of life and quoting Mark Twain. I've lived through some terrible things in my life, some of which actually happened. Harry called me a modern-day Mark Twain, and I said, I'm Twine, not Twain. You, on the other hand, could be his twin. Harry was lively right up to the end, a decent stand-up guy. May he rest in peace and rise in glory. As for me, I'm on the verge of decline, and surely decline can be hard. Old pitchers get shellacked one day because the slider won't slide, and the next spring they're selling used Toyotas and dealing with being former. Old writers slip into self-parody, and that's when people give them lifetime achievement awards. Old politicians get a book contract and realize it's hard to make a coherent memoir out of 40 years of attending meetings. Movie stars take bit parts as befuddled neighbors or psychopathic retirees. Old pop stars play small casinos, the kind with the slot machines alongside the stage, and there's no dressing room, just a hallway where they hang out with fans they don't want to know. Old humorists write a book about aging. The very thing nobody wants to know more about. That's how it goes. But decline needn't be precipitous, and gradual decline can be disguised as a stylistic choice. You're not slowing down, you're allowing your chi to find its Tao. My wife's mother was a feminist, so my wife is confident in hardware stores and issues instructions to painters and plumbers who glance over at me and ask, do you need to run this by him? And she says, no, he's a writer. Authorship is a perfect disguise, incompetence posing as otherworldliness. My mother, Grace, was lucid to the end, though sometimes she conversed with her sisters Elsie and Jean, who were gone from the world but still clear in her mind, and she died at 97, recognizing us children, comprehending what we said, looking exhausted, and when I said, would you like to lie down, she said yes. We sat around her bed for 2 days, singing hymns to her, the more joyful ones holding her hand. 10 feet away was the kitchen where the carnivals of canning took place. The kitchen like a boiler room, billows of steam from the cooker, tea kettles boiling, hot water to skin the tomatoes and sterilize the glass jars, slaving away to maintain our lives. As a child, I worried that maybe canning was a sign that we were poor. Our neighbors were not canners. The dread of the stigma of poverty stuck with me until I went to college and actually was poor and took it as a point of pride. My mother believed in Christmas, the festival of generosity, of good cheer, and a light heart in the face of darkness and adversity, and now she lay small and frail, drifting away in the downstairs bedroom of the house Dad had built 70 years before. It was more or less as she wished to go. Gently at home among loved ones, I sang to her, "When peace like a river attendeth my way, and sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." She was enclosed in a fine bronze casket and buried next to Dad in the Trot Brook Cemetery, just north of the Keeler farm where she fell in love with him, though I sort of wish she would have landed in the Pioneer Cemetery at Cedar Avenue and Lake Street in Minneapolis, not far from her childhood on Longfellow Avenue. Mother wasn't a country girl, and at Trot Brook she was surrounded by farm wives, many of whom she was not comfortable around, women who could drive truck and use firearms and handle a chainsaw. Pioneer is the cemetery where I believe she went one night in the fall of 1936 with John and I, and lay on a blanket in the grass and got pregnant. Anyway, I've bought 2 plots at Trot Brook near my parents. One is for my ashes to be deposited in a cardboard box, and the other is to be left vacant for lovers to sit down on. My tombstone will say, "And he will raise them up at the last day." But if anyone wants to lie down, that is fine by me.